First off, no Democrat has won statewide office in Texas since the 1990s. A lot of attempts, a lot of people trying different things, visiting every county in the state, things like that. What's different about your strategy?
Yeah, well, listen, I'm a fourth-generation Texan, and I was raised here in Dallas by a single mom who was a public school teacher. My mom grew up in Brownsville, that's where my aunt grew up. My grandfather was a customs officer there. I went to public schools here in Dallas. I went to Baylor to play football there and have served here in Congress for the last 6 years. And so I think I know who we are as Texans. And we are not who Ted Cruz says we are, or my story really wouldn't have been possible. And what I want to make sure is that every Texan knows who I am and how I want to bring us together as Texans. Because the way I've served in Congress shows that it's possible to serve while not pitting folks against each other. I'm been named the most bipartisan member of the entire Texas congressional delegation. There's 38 of us. I've been the most bipartisan. I'm proud of that, and I work at it. And I want to also focus on the things that I know we share as Texans, because I think when you come from an athletic background the way I do, in locker rooms where I've seen folks who are from very different backgrounds come together and understand that they actually share more than they think they might have and become brothers and really close friends in a way they never would have in the outside world. That's taught me that it's possible in every walk of life, and I want to bring that to the Senate.
Again, your strategy, though, how do you get that message out to Texans? Statewide office, no Democrats since the 90s.
Yeah, well, we've been going all over the state, of course, and that's a big part of it. But also, of course, trying to communicate in every way we can to Texans what's possible. Because to me, I think we've seen what we get from Ted Cruz. We've had 12 years of that. We've had 12 years of somebody who I think has really prided himself on being an extremist, on pitting us against each other, on spending a lot of time on himself. That's how you can go to Cancun when 30 million Texans are freezing in the dark and you decide it's a good time to go on vacation, is because you're only focused on yourself. And I'm the exact opposite. And so we have to make sure that Texans know that. And our strategy, of course, is to go everywhere and talk to everyone. And I don't see us so much as Democrats and Republicans or independents or anything like that. I see us as Texans, and I always have.
When it comes to fundraising, Senator Cruz's last opponent raised a record amount of money, $80 million, almost double what the senator did. It still wasn't enough. It got close, but wasn't enough. Does that concern you, the fundraising, the money? I'm
not concerned at all. Listen, we have been supported by folks all over our state, and I'm incredibly proud. We've had about an average contribution of around $30. And I'm proud of that because I was raised by a single mom who was a public school teacher, and I know what folks are doing. It's an act of hope when they contribute to a campaign like this. Hope that we can change. Hope that we can go in a different direction. And so to me, that's not going to be the concern. The concern, of course, is that we're a big state and I want to get in front of as many Texans as possible and make sure they know my story and that it doesn't have to be this way. And I do think that fundamentally here in our state, freedom is under attack right now by extremists like Ted Cruz. Your freedom to make your own healthcare decisions, including access to an abortion. We have an abortion ban here that has gone way too far, in my opinion. Forced folks here in Dallas who are moms, like Kate Cox, who's a mother of two, and who got the news that we all hope we don't get, that her third pregnancy wasn't going to make it. She had to go to the emergency room 4 times. Her doctor said she needed to be treated, and she couldn't get it here at home. That's not who we are as Texans, and we have to change that.
Well, we've talked to political experts, pundits, political science professors. They say the key to flipping Texas from red to blue once again it's about voter mobilization. I know you have some background in that with law. What's your approach when it comes to that? Yeah,
well, my passion has always been to make sure that more folks get involved in our democracy. When I was a voting rights lawyer, I never asked anybody who they were going to vote for. I just wanted them to vote. And our issue in Texas has been, for some time, that we've had really low voter turnout. And that's a real issue for us. And we have to try and overcome that. We have laws that make it difficult to vote. But that's not the only reason. I think we also have had a lot of our fellow Texans who've decided that, maybe, being involved in elections, being involved in our democracy, maybe it's not for me. I've got a lot going on in my life. And I want to make sure that those Texans know that, number one, I will be a senator to serve them and that this will have a big impact on their lives. But number two, that they have the power to shape the state that they want. And that we don't have to keep going down this road of division and partisan rancor and having a senator who only looks out for himself. You can have someone who looks out for you.
Touching on something you were just saying, how do you fight voter apathy, especially when voters, Democrats, maybe think, a Republican wins every time statewide. Why does it matter? What do you say to them?
Well, this is about our future. And our future, I think, is a bright one if we can get out of our own way. If we can have extremists like Ted Cruz who are no longer leading us down what I think is an unsustainable path. And so to me, that's what I talk to all of my fellow Texans about. It's what I talked to them about when I ran for Congress here in Dallas against a 22-year incumbent Republican who nobody thought that I could beat, who didn't even have an opponent in the previous election because no Democrat wanted to run against him, and who I remember, just weeks out from the election, all the major prognosticators were saying that we weren't going to win, and I won that race by nearly 7 points. Because I've always been focused on building coalitions, reaching out to folks who might not necessarily always be Democrats, and saying, listen, I want to be somebody who can serve you as well, and that's what I want to do in this race.
Before he was elected, your opponent, Senator Cruz, kind of described himself as a fighter, unapologetic. He was there to shake things up in Washington. He's pretty much delivered on that. So I guess for people who aren't too familiar with you at home, what's your approach in Washington? I guess what's your style of politics? What's your style of persuasion?
Yeah, well, I would say there's a time to fight, certainly, but not everything has to be a fight. And that's where I think Senator Cruz has gone way too far. He's somebody who has been such an extremist that his own colleagues are some of his harshest critics on his side of the aisle in the United States Senate because they feel like they can't work with him to get anything done at all. I've been the opposite, and I think it comes from being captain of the football team at Baylor, being raised here by a single mom, understanding that there are folks out there who are working really hard and hope that their elected officials are working as hard as they are to get things done. And that's how I think what we actually need going forward now is a senator who would try and make sure he delivers for us instead of grandstanding or having stunts or making sure that you're the loudest voice on social media or that you're podcasting 3 to 5 times a week for hundreds of hours instead of focusing on what Texans need. That to me is not the right approach. I have been, as I said, named the most bipartisan member of the entire Texas congressional delegation. I have the kind of unusual distinction of having been supported and endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is a pro-business organization, and also by major labor unions like the AFL-CIO, because I also look out for folks and their ability to work and organize. It is possible to bridge some of these seemingly unbridgeable divides, both in our politics and our society, and I want to be one of those folks who can do that.
And for people at home who think, it just seems like it's always a stalemate in Washington, maybe it does take someone who just fights all the time. Maybe extremism is the way to go. What would you say to that?
Well, I think the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We have not been getting things done that we need to be getting done. We have not been delivering for Texans in a way that I think we should be. We have so many issues that need to be solved. And we're going through a congressional session right now, which is one of the least productive Congresses in American history because it's so full of rancor. In the House, we went 3 weeks without even having a speaker for the first time. We've experienced an insurrection. We've been through so much. To me, it's now time to heal some of these divisions and remind us of our shared and common values as Texans. I know who we are. I'm a 4th-generation Texan. I went to Baylor, I grew up here in Dallas, and we are not as divided as the cable news segments might make us out to be. We're not as, we understand each other as Texans. We have so many common goals and values. We need to come back to some of that. There will be fights. We were gonna have to fight in terms of restoring individual rights like access to women making their own decisions about their bodies. That's gonna be a fight at times, but not everything has to be.
In Washington, when you see things not really getting done, you were saying not very productive, does that frustrate you? How do you push through that?
It's been incredibly frustrating. I mean, I think particularly as an athlete, as somebody who's comes from a background where results matter, and where if you don't get results, then you have accountability for that. Unfortunately, what I've seen is that too many folks then gum up the works and make sure nothing happens, and then get rewarded for that. And that to me has to be, we have to flip that kind of incentive structure and make sure that we get back to that we're trying to elect public officials who are trying to lead us in a shared direction. And that, yeah, as I said, we're gonna have some disagreements, but that we're ultimately gonna also continue to try and find ways to get things done. Because I think about that single mom out there, like my mom, who is working 2 jobs and who's trying to make sure that she's putting enough food on the table, keeping a roof over her kids' heads. And I know that she's hoping that the folks in Washington and Austin and our city halls around our great state are working as hard as she is to try and deliver for her family.
How do you get back to a functioning Congress, and how would you do that? How would you help, I guess, as a freshman senator?
Yeah, well, one of the first ways will be to get rid of some of the extremists, and Ted Cruz is one of the top extremists in the entire country. We did not get here on our own. It's not accidental that we've arrived at this point. Ted Cruz is one of the folks most responsible for why our politics are in this place. And he's proud of that. And he's spent 12 years telling us all about that. And we see what the end result is. The end result is that freedoms are under attack here in Texas. that we feel like our democracy itself is at risk. Folks feel like they can't even have a holiday meal with their family and talk about what's happening in the news because it's so divisive. That is where we've landed. And so part of it is replacing someone like that with someone who will be someone who can bridge gaps and bring folks together. And what I have seen is that it is possible when you have a nucleus of folks who are trying to do that they can reach agreements and get things done, like passing, for example, the infrastructure bill. It was a bipartisan effort. I voted for it. Mitch McConnell voted for it. The Republican leader in the Senate, Ted Cruz, voted against it. Now it's bringing $35 billion to our state over 5 years. Or the CHIPS and Science Act, helping us restore high-tech manufacturing and bringing jobs to Texas. I voted for it. John Cornyn voted for it and helped push it through. Ted Cruz voted against it. Or after the tragedy in Uvalde, when those poor babies were attacked and murdered, we passed the Safer Communities Act. John Cornyn helped push it through in the Senate. I helped push it through in the House. It was a bipartisan effort. Ted Cruz voted against it. He is never a part of the bipartisan solutions we see, and everyone knows that he won't be.
If we can jump to some of the issues that are top of mind for voters out there. You've talked about growing up with a single mom, knowing what it's like to say a little prayer when you swipe the debit card at the checkout. I guess, what is your game plan should you be elected to the Senate? Yeah, what's the game plan to combat rising prices that are affecting everybody, restaurants like this?
That's right. We have to tackle this. And when you grow up the way I did, I think you have a sensitivity to what it means for eggs to be more expensive. I mean, I know what it's like to go through the checkout line and have to put things back because you couldn't afford that this week. And I know what that feeling is. And as a parent now, I certainly understand how devastating that would be to have to do that for my kids. And so that's why I've always been so focused on lowering folks' costs everywhere I can. From your healthcare costs, I'm proud that we capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for folks who are on Medicare. I voted for that. Ted Cruz voted against it again. He also prevented us from capping that for folks who aren't on Medicare, but we have seen some providers already lower their cost of insulin to match that. They're also trying to combat things like your childhood costs. I'm the first member of Congress to ever take paternity leave, and I use that as an example to try and talk about why it's necessary for us now to have a national paid leave policy where folks, when they have a child or when they have a life event, that they're able to take some time off while also still not leaving their job. A lot of good companies are already doing that because they know it increases productivity and helps them retain their workers. We should have a national policy around that. And we have to also continue to make sure that we're good stewards, of course, of the public dollars. And I've been proud of trying to make sure that we do that, and I want to be even more aggressive on that going forward. What I see from Ted Cruz is somebody who I don't think is interested at all in lowering folks' everyday costs, who really is only looking out for the wealthiest and the best connected.
I guess keeping money in people's pockets is always a good thing, saving where you can. Tackling those rising prices, inflation, is there a game plan there?
Yeah, well, we are still coming out of a pandemic, and I think we have to remember that just a few years ago, we were all sat at home, or then when we came out, there were still things that weren't open, and we're still seeing some of that tail effects of that. But I do think the game plan overall has to be to make sure that we continue to grow the economy. We're continuing to see economic growth, but we have to bring down inflation. And I think that has to be a joint effort, both with the Federal Reserve, which we've seen what they're doing, but also with the Congress making smart fiscal policy when it comes to our tax policy, yes, but also with the investments that we make, so that we're not, when we make these investments that keep folks in dollars in folks' pockets, that we're not also having an inflationary impact.
And jumping to reproductive rights, if we could talk about that for a moment. Your father, you just said in 2019, unbeknownst to you, you became the first congressman to take paternity leave. You've spoken out against the state's abortion law. Your opponents and other Republicans who support really strict restrictions on abortion say that they're trying to protect life. That's the phrase you hear a lot, protecting life. How does that phrase strike you?
Yeah. Well, what I've seen is that this is a law that has gone way too far, and that this is the predictable outcome of what extremists like Ted Cruz have been saying for decades, and now have made into a reality here in Texas. And what it looks like in Texas is that it's over 20,000 Texas women have been forced to give birth to their rapist child. That's not my number, that's the Houston Chronicle's number. It looks like mothers like Lauren Miller, who's a neighbor of mine here in North Texas. She's an 8th generation Texan. She already was a mother and got pregnant with twins. One of the twins wasn't going to make it and was actually killing the other one and her. And her doctor here in Dallas said that she was going to have to leave the state to get the care that she needed, and she had to go to Colorado to get treated. Or Kate Cox, who I mentioned, who was already a mother and who had to go to the emergency room 4 times, and her doctor said she needed a medically necessary abortion and couldn't get it close to home. Or Dr. Austin Denard, who's a friend of mine and who's an OBGYN herself, whose husband is also an OBGYN, who noticed herself on her own ultrasound the baby's skull wasn't forming, and she could not get the care she needed close to home and had to leave our state. And these are multi-generation Texans who are being forced by this extreme law to have to go somewhere else to get treated by some other doctor who they've never met, in some place they've never been, staying in some hotel, having to find childcare for the kids they already have. That's how far this law has gone. But it also has, I think, an impact that we're not talking about on our businesses and on our university systems, and that we are only beginning to see, which is that folks are already starting to say that they don't want to send their kids to school in Texas. And our medical schools, we're seeing changes in who's applying to come here. They're having a harder time attracting and retaining talent. And the same thing I'm hearing from a lot of business leaders, that when they're trying to bring someone in or keep someone who's talented here, this is part of their conversation they're having to have with them. Well, what if I want to start a family? How's this law going to impact me? It's going to impact every aspect of our lives, and we have to reverse it.
When the argument gets positioned as such to where it seems that Democrats are protecting women's rights and those in favor of strict abortion rules and laws are protecting life, as a father, how did those words strike you?
Yeah. Well, my wife and I have been blessed with 2 healthy pregnancies, 2 beautiful baby boys here in Dallas in the last 5 years at Baylor, not far from where we're sitting right now. There's nothing more important to me than protecting life and protecting their lives and to making sure that they have everything that they need. What I often see from folks like Ted Cruz when they talk about that is that they talk about it in a very narrow context. But then once you have that child, they're not there at all. They want to talk about early childhood education. They don't want to talk about childcare. They don't want to talk about pre-K. They don't want to talk about paid leave. They don't want to talk about investing in public education. They're saying basically, you're on your own. To me, when you want to talk about how can we best support families here in Texas, we have to have a comprehensive system because it's really hard right now. Most daycares won't even take a kid until they're past 6 months, right? It's really hard in Texas to have a child and to be working and to keep providing for your family. And that's also costing us in terms of our economy. And we've seen time and time again that when you have policies that are pro-family, like early childhood care, like universal pre-K, like access to paid family leave, that it also has more of an economic impact because then you have more workers in the system who are also more efficient and who are happier in their work, they're more productive. It's an overall benefit to our society. And so to me, that's the holistic approach that we have to take, is that we want to make sure that we have as few unplanned pregnancies as possible. So let's invest in that. But then let's also make sure that women can make their own healthcare decisions about their bodies in consultation with their doctors and with their faith.
Last month, you were in Austin at a women's center on the anniversary of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Why was it important for you to be there that day?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a dark anniversary in a lot of ways. It's one of the first times that I'm aware of that we've seen a right that has been granted for over 50 years in the United States ripped away from Texas women. And when I talk to so many Texas women, including my mom, they're shocked that here we are at this stage and that we're still having some of these fights. In fact, that these rights have been taken away. And so what we were there that day was to dramatize and talk about the impact that this has had on real people here in Texas, and that really almost worse than any other state, we are being impacted by this ruling, but also by the state laws that were passed in conjunction with it and around it, to put us in a situation to where now we are experiencing what a near total ban on abortion looks like, and where we can't even get clarification on what the narrow exception of the life of the mother looks like. And they're in hospitals every day in Texas, including right now as we're speaking. There are hospitals that are going to be consulting with their doctors, not their lawyers, not their doctors, about whether or not a woman is sick enough to get the treatment that she needs. There are stories coming out of our state that are simply horrific of women who are being turned away from hospitals. And this is the predictable outcome of the policies that Ted Cruz has pursued. And this is just one example, I think, of how extreme he is and what that extremism has done to our state. And we have to go in a different direction.
Going to pivot now and let's talk about the border.
Yeah.
In a recent poll, Texas Voters identified border security as the most important issue facing the state right now, followed closely by immigration, hand in hand. You have a new ad touting that you stood up to President Biden when it comes to the border. Back in January, you were one of 3 Texas Democrats who supported a resolution to condemn President Biden's handling of the southern border. I guess just kind of walk us through your evolution of thought on this. You now support the president's executive orders that came out recently. What do you say for folks who see the ad as maybe some kind of flip-flop on the issue?
Well, I've got a personal story with this because my family's from Brownsville, and my grandfather was a customs officer after serving in the Navy in the Pacific in World War II. It's where my mom and my aunt grew up. I spent a lot of my childhood there. And I've always seen our border communities as not just places that you go to point out problems, but as places where real folks are living, trying to raise their families, and where I think they expect us to have responsible responses to what's happening. And what we have seen is that we've had a change to where in the last month of December of 23, we had a record number of crossings, 300,000 in a month. I think that's around the same as we had in the last year of the Obama presidency. The facts on the ground have changed. We do have a crisis at the border. Venezuela is in collapse. We've seen millions of Venezuelans fleeing Venezuela. We've seen what's happening in Haiti in terms of the gang violence that's forcing so many Haitians out of Haiti. We know what's still happening in the Northern Triangle countries, and this is also a global phenomenon that countries all over the world are facing. And so it requires a response. We have to respond with smart policy. And this is where I get really frustrated because I see Ted Cruz with a bipartisan effort in the United States Senate to bring billions of dollars to this issue for more immigration judges, for more Border Patrol agents, for more administrative personnel, to help secure the border as well, and also changing the standard on the asylum process, which is already, I think, causing and exacerbating the problem that we're having. And he says no to that, and I support it, but he's saying no. And he's saying no, and he's also at the same time admitting that he's worried that if he does that, it's going to impact the elections in November. And what he's saying when he's saying that is, I don't want to fix the problem because I want to run on the problem. And that to me has to be so outrageous to every single Texan. And I'm tired of folks going down to Brownsville, where my family's from, or to El Paso, and using it like a political safari, where they kind of put on their outdoor clothing and they're kind of trying to get in the weeds and point out migrants. And what we need them to do is help us pass legislation to address this. We're the United States of America, we're Texans. This is not beyond our capacity to have a secure, fair border where we treat people in a humane way, but that also, and sometimes will have to be tough. But it has to be, I think, in a humane way. We can do this, but we have to have leaders who actually want to.
When was the last time you went to the border, and did you get a chance to interact with some of the people trying to come across?
Yeah, well, I was just in El Paso, and of course I've been in the Valley quite a bit. And I've crossed over the border and spoken to migrants who were coming, and I've heard some of their, quite honestly, horrific stories of what they've been through on their journey to try and come to the United States. And I am sympathetic to that. That we're a nation of immigrants, and I want to make sure that our legal immigration system is working much better than it is. That's why we have to have a comprehensive reform to our legal immigration system, because there are many folks who are coming to our southern border and who are seeking asylum, who are not going to be allowed to stay. About 90% of them, in fact, are going to be rejected. But it's going to take 6, 7, 8 years for them to get that rejection because we have such a huge backlog in our asylum process. But many of them, if we had a legal immigration system that wasn't so broken, could come here and work legally through that process. So we have to fix our legal immigration system also as part of securing our border. And so to me, when I visit our border communities, I see a lot of frustration. Frustration with the inaction, frustration with the current administration, but also with the Congress. We haven't passed comprehensive reform to our immigration system since Ronald Reagan was in the White House. I mean, that's a long time. And I think it's because of folks like Ted Cruz. I am quite confident that John Cornyn and I could sit down together and pass a comprehensive immigration to our reform to our immigration system that would secure our border, but also put our immigration system on a much better footing for our economy heading forward.
So say you get elected and you're working alongside Senator Cornyn, what's one specific thing that you would like to tackle right away when it comes to, I mean, it's a big, lofty topic. There's a lot when you say comprehensive immigration reform. What's something specifically you think you can tackle right away?
I think there are 3 components that I know that we have to do. One, of course, is security. We do need more personnel. And when I speak to our Border Patrol agents, they talk to me about that all the time. I'm very concerned, actually, about the mental health of our Border Patrol agents. I've heard stories about folks who are being asked to work so much overtime that they're seeing breakdowns in their home life. and they're experiencing a lot of losses in terms of folks leaving the Border Patrol because it's become such a difficult job. So we need more personnel. That's certainly true. We need more technology, and in places, at times I've supported some physical barriers where the experts say it will be helpful. So that's the security component, and that will be one important component to it. The other one, as I mentioned, is reforming our legal immigration system to make sure that we can attract the best and the brightest from around the world and do it in a way that's not so onerous or so difficult to get through that folks feel like it's not going to work. Every employer I hear from here in Dallas and also across our state is telling me the same thing, which is they want more workers and they want to do it in a legal fashion, but the system we have isn't working. And the third component is dealing with the folks who are here, who have been here for a long time, who are undocumented, particularly our dreamers, and providing them with a pathway out of the shadows to find a way to either into citizenship or to find a way and to be able to working legally and I think consistent with our values.
Something else that stuck out to us in one of your recent campaign ads is that you said you'll fight the drug cartels. Yeah. What do you mean by that? How does the senator take on the cartels?
Well, this is I'm glad you asked that because one of the things that's become clear to me is that these cartels are responsible for so much of what we are experiencing here in Texas and across the country, both in terms of pushing fentanyl, but also the human trafficking that they're engaging in. And they're taking advantage of our broken immigration system and of our inability to respond at the border by telling folks, hey, listen, give me your life savings and I'll get you to the U.S. and you can claim asylum. And who knows, maybe you'll be able to stay. And this is a huge source of revenue for them. But also in terms of their narcotics trade, which has become incredibly sophisticated. And this is something I've talked to our Border Patrol agents about. If you are going along the border and you see someone who is fishing, for example, on the Mexican side of the border, and that seems pretty innocent, but they may not be. They may be working for one of the cartels, and they may be a spotter who's trying to tell the folks who are going to be then trying to bring narcotics across where the Border Patrol agents are at that time and whether or not they can get across at that time. And so it's become incredibly sophisticated, and it's also destabilizing Mexico itself. And I think we've seen that with the political violence that they've been experiencing around their elections, the journalists who've been attacked and murdered, really just the outbreak of incredibly violent crime that's going on the Mexican side of the southern border. And so we have to work with our partners in Mexico to take on these cartels, the same way we did working in Colombia to try and interdict the drug trade there that had become so dominant in Colombia in the 90s to where it was almost becoming a joke. And now here we are several decades later, and Colombia is in a much better place, much more stable. We can have a similar approach to the cartels of Mexico.
We just have a couple more minutes. One other thing we wanted to ask you, going back to, I guess, your style of politics, do you think, I guess my question is, do you lead more with emotion or do you like to think things through? What's your style?
Yeah, well, I think I've become, pretty well known for keeping my cool and for always being, one of the calmer people, even when everything is going to heck all around me. I think I developed that in my NFL career, where the idea was to perform. Losing your head's not going to help, right? And I think that's also true when it comes to legislation or responding to the issues of the day. That kind of snap judgment that you might make in the first moment is not always, to me, the one that's wisest and most prudent. If you think things through and also put yourself in the shoes of someone who you might disagree with, you can sometimes find yourself understanding, well, maybe this is more gray than black and white. And I'm somebody who's comfortable with that. When I see Ted Cruz, I see somebody who I think sees everything in such stark terms, that it's either black or it's white, and he's always going to be fighting it. And to me, that's not my experience of life, and I don't think it is most Texans either. That often things are very complicated, and that smart people are often working hard to try and solve them. And that well-meaning people are out there who want to be consulted with. There are well-meaning folks, some of the folks I love the most in the world disagree with me on restoring a woman's right to choose here in Texas. I understand that. I'm a Christian, I went to Baylor, I'm a church-going man, I get it, okay? But I also understand that we need to have a more fulsome conversation about how we can both protect life, consistent, I think, also with protecting individual rights, right? To me, that's the kind of thing where you have to have leaders in place who want to take that approach. But I do think that becoming a father and having 2 young children has fundamentally changed me in the way that every parent, I think, can say the same, because it has extended my view into the future so much more in terms of my concern about their future and what country and what state they're going to inherit. And I want to make sure that they have the opportunities, of course, that I had, but also that they inherit a state and a country that's not just destroyed by divisions and that's not at each other's throats, but one that does have, yes, important differences at times, but that fundamentally understands, I think as John Lewis used to tell us, that we might have come here on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. We're all Americans, we're all Texans. We have some really common values that we share. Let's get back to some of those.
Okay, Congressman, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it.